In this 10-minute screencast, we're going to talk about early Picasso, early Picasso prior to Cubism. He was a precocious young artist in Barcelona. Both of these paintings, this painting and this charcoal sketch that you see here, were drawn when he was only 15 years old. Part of his precocity came from the fact that his father was a teacher at the School of Fine Arts in Barcelona when he grew up, but you can see he was obviously not always a Cubist. He moved to Paris already in 1900 at age 19, and we'll see that while he spends the majority of his career in Paris, his Spanish heritage will remain a crucial touchstone for him. This wonderful portrait on your right is another Spaniard in Paris, Pedro Maniac, who was Picasso's first art dealer and sets him up with his first major art show in Paris in 1901. His earliest work in Paris is basically post-impressionist. A little this, a little that, focusing on relatively standard themes that had been seen going back through Impressionism, even to the realist movement, in particular cafe life. So in the work at the Krieger Museum on your left, you can see a fashionable woman sitting at a table, eating what appears to be a plate of muffins, and a woman next to her looking on, armed with a napkin, a waiter with another large bowl of moule, as they say in French, with his towel over his arm, bringing it to yet another time. Obviously, this idea of time spent in a cafe, while it is in fact quite traditional, is a theme that Picasso will continue to explore in his Cubist years, as we talk about in class. Other influences are immediately apparent if you know your way around these pictures. I brought in this Degas, a couple of absinthe drinkers in a cafe from the early period of the Impressionists, which certainly seems to be a touchstone for Picasso. I don't know if he knows this work directly or not, but it sure seems as if there's enough parallels to suggest that that was perhaps the case. And from the National Gallery, this Toulouse-Lautrec figures at the Moulin Rouge on the Montmartre, which is where Picasso lived, also would have formed a strong touchstone for him in this image of the Café de la Rotonde. These earliest Picassos from his Paris period have this really bright and strongly yellow tone, really colorful, very rich, which certainly comes from these Impressionist and post-Impressionist influences. Pedro Maniac sponsors a show of these works, and it's incredibly successful. Nearly everything from the show sells, and Picasso seems as if he's on his way to a great career if he can continue to produce these works. But what's interesting is that almost immediately he turns his back on that idiom and begins to explore a brand new style. So success seems not to have been his primary motivation. And already, as soon as he begins this, he switches to what we call now his blue period, a series of paintings that are dominated by the tonality of blue, such as this one in the Phillips collection on your right, which many people claim is the very first of the blue period works. Again, it's rife with references to post-impressionists that influenced Picasso. This idea of painting the artist's bedroom, his unmade bed in the background as the model cleans herself, is certainly reflective of one of Van Gogh's more famous work of his bedroom in the city of Arles, which originally was much more purple than this, so the blueness that you see is not necessarily the huge influence that it appears now. Van Gogh's paint changed color over time. The pictures on the wall in Picasso's work also point to references. There's a little landscape picture that appears just here And you can also see that this picture here is, in fact, also identifiable as one of the posters that Toulouse-Lautrec had done in the decade previous. And these are both fairly recent works in Picasso's room. And you can see the blue tonality here seems to have something with Picasso's as well. The woman bathing with the tray and pots for her bath is also very closely related to a number of works by Degas, where Degas depicted prostitutes in the act of bathing themselves. Picasso's model is probably his model for paintings, but also most certainly a prostitute as well. Unlike Degas, who was given the opportunity to watch prostitutes between their appointments and paint them as figure models, Picasso puts them in his own private and personal space. And that makes it a little erotic, a little bit more erotic than Degas' sort of clinical investigation of the human form. Is this woman Picasso's model in the Phillips painting, or is she his lover, his paid courtesan? If we keep in mind the Kirchner work from a little bit later, where we see the artist with his model and rife with sexual overtones, one wonders if Picasso's is not the same way. But instead of putting himself in the picture, he simply is looking in. He's there, even if he's not there. His presence is implied by his point of view. And the erotic nature of this image and the possibility that there was more going on than simply modeling for a picture is picked up in other images from this period that show what appears to be the same room, even if the roofline is somewhat different, suggesting that Picasso is engaging in sexual play, sexual innuendo with these figures, the one on your left is that MoMA. In either of these pictures, there's an odd loneliness. Picasso seems utterly disengaged with the activity on the left, and really kind of smiling to you, the viewer. On the right, there's no sort of connection between you and the model whatsoever. Many people have connected his blue period works to a period of depression on Picasso's part. A beloved sister, older sister of his, and an especially close friend had recently died. And after he turns his back on those brightly colored early pictures, Picasso, with the blue paintings, went into a very deep economic hardship. He was a foreigner in Paris and an artistic outsider. And so many people think that these pictures are meant to reflect his own sadness and his economic hardship between 1901 and around 1904. That said, many of the blue period pictures are in fact really depressing subject matters. Lots of beggars, cripples, impoverished workers, social outcasts. Everything seems intended to imply a sort of universal meaning of sadness. And so this picture on the left from the National Gallery, which is rarely on display anymore, shows a family, we presume, a mother, a father, and a young child who look utterly impoverished and utterly isolated from the world around them, standing on the beach of a vast ocean that really does not seem like it's a holiday place, but rather meant as a symbol of emptiness and isolation. The father significantly older than the mother. Could this be Joseph and Mary with the infant Christ? Picasso doesn't really tell us. Could they be the three ages of man, old age, adulthood, and childhood? That's another possibility, but again, Picasso doesn't really tell us. In addition to the post-impressionists we've been looking at, another major influence on the blue period was, in fact, symbolist artists, and Picasso in the blue period can really be seen kind of as a late offshoot offshoot of symbolism. In between his successful show for the Montmartre Gallery and the Blue Period, Picasso has gone back to Spain. And this is certainly another major influence on his Blue Period paintings, his Spanish heritage. As I mentioned before, the fact that he's a Spaniard will loom large in his works. And here in El Greco from the National Gallery is one of many El Grecos that has an overall blue tonality, and that is highlighted with, for example, shots of white. And I think you can see those in various parts of the Picasso as well, where he's highlighted it in a way that's quite similar to El Greco. El Greco is also quite well known for his elongated figure and very expressive hands, such as what we see down here. And in fact, Picasso's work shares much of that, as you see with the young boy's hands as well. In channeling El Greco, perhaps Picasso is trying to make a statement about his own role, a modern Spanish artist. Furthermore, El Greco, as his name implies, was himself an expat. He was Greek but spent his career in Spain, just as Picasso is Spanish and spent his career in France. To wrap up this art fix, I wanted to look at two other reference points for Picasso, one of which is Edvard Munch. The overall theme of human sadness and suffering and loneliness is something that Munch had been exploring quite extensively in the 1890s and early 1900s. And we'll see that Picasso shares many elements with Munch, this fear of love and sex, for example. These are key themes for Picasso, a sense of isolation and loneliness, a sense of an unchanging human condition. Despite the change in one's age, these are all strong elements in both Munch and Picasso. And in many ways, again, as I mentioned before, Picasso can be seen as a late-stage symbolist in this early part of his career, because symbolism was, in fact, still quite all the rage in Paris, or at least one of them. And then finally, other artists whose works were on view in Paris are also key influences on Picasso. Cézanne was perhaps the single most important of these, and we'll see at numerous times in his career, especially in this first decade of independence in the 1900s, that Picasso is establishing a dialogue with the great late 19th century master Cézanne. This wonderful Bather from MoMA, which shares the overall tonality of Picasso's tragedy, and the sort of sense of the landscape as presenting a symbol of isolation. The figure striding, in Cézanne's case, toward us, away from that background, but isolated from it. And the sky, the land, treated in Cézanne's characteristic patches. Picasso picks up on that as well. At this point in Picasso's career, Cézanne is still alive, and when he finally dies in 1906, and there's a major exhibition in 1907, Picasso acknowledges that Cézanne is, in fact, the father of us all, and we can certainly see that here with the comparison to the tragedy.